today, Maurice Mitchell. He has been an organizer for over 20 years. He and I go back a decade or so, organizing together on Long Island. He's been doing it even a lot longer than me. He trained me, to be honest. So he has recently gone to Ferguson and been on the ground working with young people and helping the leaders in the community organize around the community in Missouri. And so I wanted him to come and share his experience, not just in Ferguson and St. Louis, but also in general, and what he's done on Long Island. Judith and I sat down, and I said to her, you know, as a mother of an 18-year-old boy, how do you, like, what questions would, I told her all about Maurice and the things that he does. I said, what questions would you want to ask him? What questions do you think the other parents and participants need to hear? And she and I came up with some questions, mostly from Judith, thinking of each of you and knowing that, you know, she relates to the position that each of you are in. So with no further ado, I'd like to call them up to have their discussion. Maurice and Judith, please join us. And after the keynote, we will break for lunch. There'll be questions at the end, question and answer, and then we will break for lunch, and then we will do our breakouts after lunch. I'll let you know after we finish the keynote the time frame for the rest of the afternoon. Do you want to use the microphones?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, use the microphone. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So I have my questions down on a piece of paper because it's my first time. So welcome, Maurice. One of the things really important to PLI participants is that we explore where we come from. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal background, your family, your education, anything that we need to know to get to know you?
Sure, but before I do that, I'd like to thank you, Judith. I'd like to thank Danielle, PLI. I'd like to thank everybody here for choosing on a Saturday morning to come together around social change, right? So we need to expand this circle of people, right? So thank you all. And to answer your question, so I grew up on Long Island. My parents are immigrants. We got here because my grandmother is a domestic worker. And so she worked here in Nassau County. My grandmother's from Trinidad, and so she worked here in Nassau County in people's homes, taking care of their families. And on the weekends, so she stayed in their homes from Monday to Friday, and on the weekend, she didn't have a home, right? And so she would stay in the park in Long Beach, and she quickly found community members who brought her in, right? And so we ended up in Long Beach, and I grew up in Long Beach, and I learned, I think, in my first few years, everything I would need to know to help me as an organizer understand what oppression is, what community does in response to oppression, and what I felt I needed to do in my life. So I knew very early that I wanted to work on social change, and I wanted to work specifically around the issues of anti-Black racism, because of what I experienced in Long Island and what I experienced in my home, which was a really supportive home. And then, you know, Long Beach is a pretty ethnically diverse place. And even in Long Beach, that's one of the most ethnically and racially diverse high schools. The clarity around racial segregation and what that means and how that shows up and systematic racism is so stark. It left a lasting imprint in me and a desire to do everything I can do to rectify it in my lifetime.
So it's interesting because I'm going to skip a question because what I'm going to ask you now goes right in line with what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So PLI graduates and participants explore race and culture and how it shapes our lives and our children's lives. We find it important to talk explicitly about these experiences. So you share about growing up in Long Beach. What is your earliest memory of having a feeling of injustice that made you speak up? And I hear you speak about your grandmother, so.
Well, there's two things. So, you know, both my parents come from the Caribbean, and they grew up in abject poverty, right? And I learned from them telling their stories of coming here, of immigrating here, and those challenges. It just provided with me a good sort of grounding in what struggle looked like, which was very helpful for me. And then in terms of my own personal experience, I think as soon as I entered the school system, first grade, pre-K and kindergarten were cool, right? But first grade, my first grade teacher clearly treated me much different than the white kids in school, and then recommended me for immediately to be tracked in special ed, right? And so that was my first experience, and I understood immediately what was going on, right? But didn't feel like I had any power to do anything about it. And I'm 35 years old, and it's something that still resonates with me in a very emotional way, right? Something that happened to me in first grade, right? And so, when people of color try to explain the daily, sometimes microaggressions, and then sometimes just outright in-your-face white supremacy that we experience, and the damage, the psychological, psychic, emotional damage that it does to us. I'm talking about one instance that happened to me in first grade, right? Among literally thousands of instances that happened to me throughout my life as a black man in this country, right? So what makes segregation useful is the fact that my experience is separated from the experience of white folks in this country. So you could actually live in the same country and have no idea about what that experience is, right? And continue in many different ways to perpetuate a system that lets that happen in silence. Because we actually don't have an opportunity in meaningful ways to have this conversation, to share about the struggle, because we literally live in different worlds.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for being so honest. So I understand that you went away to college. Can you tell us a little bit about, we see a lot of people go away from Long Island, go to college, and don't come back to Long Island. So can you tell us what made you come back to Long Island after you graduated to begin giving back to the Long Island community?
Sure. So I went away to college. I went to DC. I was very interested in studying politics, so all of the schools that I applied to were in DC. I chose Howard University. Howard has this rich history in the civil rights movement. That's where SNCC was developed. Folks like Stokely Carmichael came out of Howard. So I was attracted to Howard for academic reasons and also for political reasons. And I started organizing seriously at Howard, right? And I after my 4 years in DC, I decided, I built a great community in DC, but I decided I wanted to go back home, and I wanted to do the work home. And I knew that, I quickly realized that I didn't want to go into electoral politics, right? No shade on the elected officials here. But I realized that my particular skills and strengths were best used outside of the system, pushing the system, versus inside. And I found employment at a place called the Long Island Progressive Coalition, where I spent 7 years as an organizer. I know Barbara Allen, we did some work together. I know some other folks in this room. And so in those 7 years, I really cut my teeth as an organizer and worked on a number of issues. That's how I know Danielle, we worked together, and I had the honor of training Danielle as an organizer and working with her on a number of issues. So that's what brought me here, my desire to come back home and do the work at home, because I understood the need here. Yep.
So that goes into my next question. What are some of the issues that you addressed while working on Long Island at the agency that you were with for 7 years?
So we worked on a number of issues. It's a multi-issue organization. I was there for 7 years. I'm not going to get through all of them, but we worked on taxation, we worked on criminal justice issues, on the Suffolk County Jail and diverting resources from building jails into alternatives to incarceration. We worked on public education. We worked on environmental issues. It runs the gamut. But ultimately, where we worked was at the nexus of social, economic, and racial justice.
So you named a couple of campaigns that you worked on.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel was your most effective campaign that you worked on?
Wow. Well, I think what I'm most proud of.
Okay.
So I think there's two campaigns that I'm most proud of. The work that we did, and this is the work that we did with a number of folks, but this is the work where I worked most closely with Barbara, around the Suffolk County Jail. So they were planning on building this mega jail that was going to cost like $500 million. And we were able to develop a campaign rooted in the most directly affected people, right? Rooted in many of the families and many of the folks that Barbara works with, and rooted in other folks who care deeply about this issue. And initially, we went to the Suffolk County legislature and they laughed at us. They didn't take us seriously. They didn't think that we were sophisticated enough, that we represented any interest that mattered. But we were consistent, and we were dogged, and we were actually able to divert a lot of that money, shrink the size of the jail, because whatever size jail you build, you fill it, right? And so I'm proud of that, because the jail is built, and it's not a 1,200 bed jail, And so I could, in a very concrete way, look at that change and know that every day, those are beds that are not being filled, right? And those are beds that would be filled by young Black and Latino men, right? That are now not in those jail cells, right? So that's one that I'm really proud of. The second one is some of the work we did building a really democratic space for folks in the community of Wyandanch to figure out how they were going to change the condition of their school district. And I'm really proud of that, because we came in as staff people, but it was organic and truly led by the people in terms of the platform that they came up with. And eventually, within a year, they ran, community members and ran and won, and actually created new policies in that school district, new policies that stand today. So I'm really proud of those particular campaigns.
So speaking of the Wyandanch campaign that I know you worked with Danielle on, so one of the questions that we have, how did you get people in the community involved? How did you get people on Long Island involved to really make a change?
Well, that's a good question. Organizing is about relationships, right? And I think good organizers are honest, and build meaningful relationships with the folks that they're attempting to work with. So I think we did a decent job of building those initial relationships, right? And I think we created a process that people really felt was theirs, right? We didn't come in with preconceived notions about how it was going to go, right? We truly believed in the idea that the people who are most directly affected actually have, within their lived experience, the ingenuity, the intelligence to solve their own problems, right? It's not going to come from outside, and that our role is to create the environment and ask the right questions so that they could surface that. And I think people felt like that was authentic, and that's what drew people to that space, because it was a space in a community which is a working class Black community where folks don't have a lot of spaces where they could come together and feel empowered. It was a space that felt really powerful. And so it attracted a small group of people who then brought other people because they were excited about that space. So I think, as organizers, it's our job to create spaces that people want to be in because they realize their power. It helps them become more acquainted with their power. And I think the most important switch that you want to flip is the switch where a person goes from somebody where things happen to them to somebody that makes things happen, right? It's a very liberating experience. It's a very exciting experience. And if you're in a space that flips that switch for you, you're gonna wanna stay in that space and attract others into that space. And also, we made sure that it was fun and we had food and we hung out and all those other good
Food always
things.
works.
Yeah, I think that's another thing. That's another caution about the professionalizing of organizing and advocacy and everything, right? Ever since, organizing has existed as long as there've been people who've had conflicts or issues or whatever, right? And I think what's really important is that whatever barriers may exist between the people and these spaces, right? It's our job to minimize those barriers, break down those barriers. And so some of these cultural barriers that we actually create, by being so professionalized in the way that we look at things, narrows the space because it makes it feel like a space that, I don't think I'm a professional person, so I shouldn't be here, right? Or the language that you're using, I don't know this language, so I shouldn't be here, right? It's our job to make the culture of the spaces that we call organizing spaces or advocacy spaces as close to the culture of the folks that we're trying to reach, So if folks come together in song and food and fellowship, and the meeting takes a lot longer, well, that's what the meetings we should create, right? And if we spend half the meeting hanging out, and then the other half doing the work, but the hanging out is the work too, because we're building relationships.
I think it's
right?
important that we
And
challenge
so,
some of the
professional culture has seeped into these spaces, and this is not office work. We're trying to liberate ourselves, right? And we need to really challenge that, because I think and then we turn around, we wonder why are these people, why are they not? Because we've created an environment that is implicitly prohibitive to a whole swath of the community to join. So.
Wow, that was phenomenal, because he answered my next question, and it's how do you bring people together? And he just stated how we bring people together.
I mean, has anybody here organized a bridal shower or a party? Or what?
Yeah.
That's how you bring people together. I think that the problem is, we go into organizer mode, and they're like, okay, how do we bring people together? We always bring people together. Just do what you always do when you want to bring people together. It's not, organizing is not that deep, right? We spend, you bring people together by bringing people together. The same way you bring people together in other parts of your life. Just do it the same way, right? And people actually, people are human beings. We want to have fun, right? Make it fun. We like things that look cool. Make it look cool, right? We enjoy music. We enjoy food. Why, for some reason, when it comes to changing the world, do we cosmetically remove everything that we enjoy out of it and just keep the things that are boring and expect people to be engaged? Doesn't make any sense. We should do the opposite. All the boring stuff, find that stuff, leave it out. Just do the stuff that people like.
Music and food.
Yes. Yeah. So, that's my first thing. And then the second thing, the other piece around organizing is it's our job. It's about power. It always comes down to power, right? And it's our job to build. We as regular people, as regular middle class and working class people, we're never gonna have enough money to go dollar for dollar and beat corporations and billionaires dollar for dollar. It's never gonna happen, right? What we do have is people power. There's a lot more than us than it is of them, right? and you know, I was talking to somebody, right? And you know, he was like, somebody I recently hired, and he was like, yeah, but it's so hard because they have billions of dollars and they're using it. They're using all of this money in lobbying and, you know, buying off politicians and, you know, buying off, you know, this person and that person. How do we compete with that? And I was like, add up all of that money. Add up all of that money. And that's the amount of money that they have to invest. That's how powerful we are. They have to invest all that money just to counterbalance the power of the people, right? So you gotta flip the paradigm. That's how powerful we are, actually, right? And so we need to flip that switch and realize our power. And once that happens, right, our job, right, is to organize enough of us that we are able to pose an existential threat to the folks that we want to give us what we want, right? And once we're able to develop enough people power that we could pose that existential threat, they will give us what we want. But up until then, they will not give us what we want, which is why we organize.
I hope the PLI participants were listening in class. So I'd like to focus now, the second half, on your work in Ferguson.
Yep.
So recently you took a leave of absence from your job with an NYC civic engagement table, and you went to Missouri to help organize the people. What personally motivated you to do that? Okay,
so this is also really, really easy for me, right? So this isn't an issue, right, that, you know, I'm observing. I'm a black man, right? And probably 95% of all black men in this country, regardless of their educational attainment, their socioeconomics, right? Where they're from, right? Any of that stuff could identify deeply on a cellular level with Mike Brown, with Trayvon Martin, with the young man that was killed in Madison, Wisconsin yesterday, right? So, you know, like, I was student president in high school, all 4 years, right? I graduated from college with honors, right? You know, I have the ability to write and speak on an academic level, right? By the time I was 20, I had already been wrongfully jailed, right? Wrongfully arrested. By the time I was in my early 20s, I already knew what pepper spray felt like in my eyes. Already been beaten up by the police. You know, by my mid-teens, I've already been pulled over by Nassau County Police and Long Beach Police, you know, dozens of times, given random tickets just because, right? That's me, Mr. Class President, okay? That's my experience. What do you think is the experience, right, of the young black man in East New York, who maybe isn't the class president, right? Maybe he did get in trouble. What? Kids can't get in trouble anymore? Right? We're like, kids can't be kids anymore, right? So, you know, I hear a lot of people when they talk about Mike Brown and they talk about these issues, they're like, well, you know, starts at home. These kids need to pull their pants up. Stop using the N-word. These kids need to go to school more. The maddening thing about all this is what happens when you go to school. What happens when you do the right thing and you still get killed like a dog out in front of your grandmother's house and laid out there for 4.5 hours for all of your friends, family, and neighbors to see. What happens then? Mike Brown was going to college. That wasn't good enough? So the sickening thing about our culture and the sort of blasé way we accept the complete dehumanization of black people in this culture is that there is a immediate reaction as soon as something like this happens, right? And this is another thing we need to switch. Immediately after, it was like, what was that kid doing? right? The unarmed murdered person in the situation, right? We're wanting to look at his high school record to see if we can find any disciplinary action, right? Trayvon Martin, they found traces of weed in his system. Every teenager has traces of weed in their system. And then you have people in the media saying, oh, he had weed in his system. So, last time I checked, that wasn't an executional offense, right? So the extrajudicial murder of black people, right? Basically, the message that we get as black people is like, it's okay for you to be murdered, unless you're a good kid, right? I haven't seen what this good kid looks like, right? Because I thought I was a good kid. I got arrested. I got taken to jail. I got beaten up by police officers, right? So I think we need to, like, this fantasy about the good kid, and that there's actually a way for us to avoid this by changing our attitude. That's victim blaming, right? And we need to confront these issues with some honesty. It's victim blaming, right? And so we're participating in victim blaming, right? We're looking at the unarmed dead person and wondering, what was it in their past that led to this person to kill them? I've never heard a police union say, you know what, we got this one wrong. So our instinct isn't to do that, right? Because we reflexively have to, like, apparently police officers aren't tough enough to deal with public scrutiny, right? So we have to reflexively hug police officers, you know, and coddle them, right? Instead of challenge the institution, because apparently any deviation from that, and we're anti-police, right? And so we need to challenge some of these things, because if we don't challenge these notions, more children are going to die. So that's what brought me there, that urgency, and my experience doing some organizing around Trayvon, and me wanting to, me deciding after Trayvon that I was going to, with every fiber of my body, next time there was opportunity, do something about it. So I took leave, I got on a plane to St. Louis, and I stayed there for 5 months.
Thank you. I have a round of applause for that. I thank you as a parent, and I thank you as a PLI and alumni for sharing that with us. So speaking of system failures and changes, one of the things that I observed, and I'm sure many of you observed, the media seemed to repeat the same footage over and over again. People looting, being violent. People need to hear about the positive organizing effects that were going on. What were some of the successful organizing efforts you had down there? Can you describe them for us, please, that helped the community?
Sure, so I want to challenge a few things here. Okay?
I'm ready.
If you haven't done, okay, you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna try.
I mean, I feel like good organizers were interrupters, right? And so if my time here doesn't fundamentally interrupt a narrative or in some way upset, then I haven't done my duty as an organizer. So that's, so roll with me, okay?
Rolling.
All right, so number one, we need to challenge this idea around good protest and bad protest, right? Just like we need to challenge this idea around, like, oh, it's a good kid. So, because the idea that, like, oh, he got killed and he was a good kid suggests that bad kids should get killed, right? Right? That's basically what it says. It suggests that, oh, well, the bad kids should get killed. We just need to protect the good kids, right? And it's actually okay for bad kids to be assassinated on these streets because we need less of them anyhow, right? And good kids we save. So we can't get into this good kid, bad kid thing, right? If you have a teenager, you know that teenagers are fundamentally bad, right? You know, like, in the sense that, like, it's your job as a teenager to challenge the status quo, to challenge laws, to challenge the laws in whatever law you lay down at home, whatever law they erect outside. That's your job as a teenager, right? So this good kid, bad kid thing, it's smokescreen, because we don't want to actually deal with the issue that we're actually killing black kids on the street every day, right? Second thing, this good protester, bad protester thing, this is why it exists. It exists because we don't want to confront the reality that the only reason, or one of the main reasons that Ferguson became a thing, is because of the rioting and the looting. We don't want to deal with that. We don't want to deal, you know, Eric Holder was like, the only thing that's ever worked was peaceful protest. No, peaceful protest works, and also the destruction of property works too. It does. Like, historically it does. It's uncomfortable, but we don't want to have an honest conversation around the fact that as a tactic, the destruction of property has historically worked in this country and also internationally with all social movements, right? People don't want to deal with that because they want to create this very sanitized vision of how change happened, right? So the civil rights movement is a very complex movement with a lot of players, right? What we want to believe is that MLK emerged from some sort of mystical fog somewhere as a fully realized man, right? And just like floated to DC, and thousands of people just joined him. And he was like, everybody, let's hold hands and get together. And then LBJ passed some laws, and then racism was over, right? We want to believe that. What we don't want to deal with is the fact that a lot of people died. A lot of people died, right? It was very violent. Most of the violence was coming from the state and coming from domestic terrorist organizations, right? And there was a violent, armed component of the struggle that led to the liberation of the people in that movement. And it's part of a 400-year story of all types of violence. We don't want to deal with that, right? We also don't want to extend our imagination past any dates that make us really uncomfortable. So don't talk about slavery, right? Because that happened actually didn't happen a long time ago, right? Like, you know, a comedian was saying, like, there's really intelligent, there's really intelligent people who are like, slavery happened 400 years ago. Actually, no, it didn't, right? So, you know, slavery happened, 160 years ago it ended, right? It didn't end that long ago. It just didn't end that long ago, right? And then do people think that like the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and then some mystical smoke appeared and all the chains of bondage magically melted into platinum chains, which the enslaved folks were able to exchange for money, right? No. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and then the condition of black people was exactly the same the day after. That's what happened, right? That's actually what happened, right? And many people exchanged the life of chattel slavery, right, for the existence of a sharecropper, right? Working for the same people, living in the same condition, leading miserable lives, right? Only under Reconstruction was there a moment in our country's history where through the use of force, again, through state violence, they were, our federal government, right, mandated that those southern states, preserve the dignity and the democracy of black citizens in the South. And as soon as Reconstruction ended, as soon as the military left occupied South, like a switch, the KKK and the domestic terrorist organizations and the white supremacist organizations shut all that down, right? And so actually, in our lived experience as black people in this country, we had hundreds of years of slavery, right? Emancipation Proclamation happened, right? Years of sharecropping, right? Jim Crow, we just say Jim Crow, it sounds like somebody's name. Oh, Jim Crow, right? Jim Crow, right? Which, if anybody has a family member who lived through that, raise your hand. Or who lived through that and could tell you what that was, right? The insufferable apartheid of Jim Crow, right? That only legally was ended, right? Through the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, right? Legally was ended, right? So let's use data, right? Because I believe in using data. Let's use data, right? So the actual data demonstrates that in terms of the segregation of black children and white children in schools, right? There's not very much different. In fact, we're going backwards. So look at the data in 1920, and 1960, and 1990, and 2015, and you tell me what's so different. You tell me what's been so transformational about this experience, and how we're in this totally different reality, and how racism is over. Just let's use data. Don't even take my word for it. Use every piece of data out there, right? Let's use arrest data. Let's use prison data. Let's use educational outcomes. Let's use the data around residential segregation, around segregation in schools. You got data? Let's use all of those data for as long as they've tracked it. Let's use it all. And you tell me based on the data, not on the feelings, not on what you want to feel, how we're in any significant different place. The one area where black people have improved is we've grown a black middle class where one hasn't existed, right? And so there's some black people who have access to a normal life and access to decent jobs and decent wages, right? In a number that didn't exist back in the 60s and the 70s. So that's increased, right? That's one place where, but outside of that, I mean, if you look at, let's take wealth data. Let's look at that. Let's look at wealth, as well as income, as all of that. We could put it all down there. And being dispassionate, looking at the data, one must conclude, in terms of the condition of racial justice in this country, we have a very, 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 very long way to go.
So I don't believe in coincidences. I always say this. You just sparked, like as you were speaking, in my mind is like going a mile a minute. Regarding segregation on Long Island, the educational system, I just participated in a piece where I did an interview about the segregation on Long Island, residential and educational, as you stated. So what were some of the similarities you saw in Ferguson and Long Island communities?
So the similarities I saw, so here's the thing about Ferguson, right? Like, Ferguson is a suburb. So Ferguson isn't the hood, it's a suburb. People have lawns. Okay? You know, it's not a ghetto. It's a place that black people in St. Louis go when they get a little money and they, all right, we're gonna go live in, Ferguson or Delwood, right? And there's a lot of small localities there. So right next to Ferguson, there's another one and another one. They're very, very tiny, right? Like, people think that anywhere where there's black people, that's automatically the hood. Like, black people live in urban places. Like, there's mad black people in the South, right? And there's black people who live, obviously, in the suburbs, right? So, all of these euphemisms like inner city, whatever, you're just trying to say black, just say it, right? Okay, at risk. What does at risk even mean? Why do we even use that language? It doesn't even make any sense. Where is the inner city? Geographically, where is that place? It's just like nonsensical language because we as Americans are afraid of our thoughts, right? That's what that is, and that's a whole other thing, but I digress. So,
we're gonna have to have him back another time.
So yeah, it's a suburb like Long Island, and like Long Island, there's a lot of very small localities, and many of these small localities have their own police forces, like Long Island, right? And when you have these tiny localities, you're able to met out your own special style of justice in that little place.
That's right.
Right? And you're able to keep your little family secret there in that little town, right? And met out a certain type of local injustice, and local nepotism, And so that's what you saw. I mean, you saw, the thing is like, trust me, if anybody saw the report or read the report, right? they're sending racist emails back and forth to one another. They're like, whatever, it's the Ferguson clerk. They did not think that Eric Holder was going to be reading them, right? So I think sometimes in our little local communities, we feel like we're outside of the reach of some of the eyes, the all-knowing eye of justice, and we could kind of make this our little playground to do whatever we want to do in it. And I think so for a long time that was true. Like you have a population that was majority black, right? But it was a mixed population. There was like 40% white people, right? Being governed and policed by almost 100% white police force and elected officials and city bureaucracy, and these folks like had outright contempt for the people that they were serving, right? And what I will say is, everybody, it's really long, but you should at least look at the footnotes of that report, right? It's pretty. It's like the smoking gun of systematic racism, right? Because not only were these officials involved in this, they knew what they were doing. They knew that arresting working class black people and finding them was a revenue source for them. And that's why they were picking people up, right? And so once you read all that, I want you to do this thought experiment. Is it possible that Ferguson, Missouri is the only place in the country where this happens every single day? And then do another thought experiment. Is it possible that some of these same things happen on Long Island?
Absolutely.
All right, so that's the question I wanted you to point out and answer, and you actually did. So the next piece is, our PLI participants are given the skills, knowledge, and confidence to make change for children and families. By the end of the time in the class, they see themselves as leaders. But we still need to support and encourage them to take opportunities, to use skills that they gained, but also understanding the importance of goal setting.
Yes.
And understanding how to reach those goals. So how can you, as an organizer, give us answers to setting goals, encouraging families, and did you reach your goals that you set while you were down in Ferguson?
So yes and no in terms of if I reach my goals. Okay. So I knew that I was going to stay in Ferguson for a finite amount of time.
Okay.
So I think I had some pretty. What I wanted to do was help build some infrastructure that could remain there and help do leadership development, so there would be more leaders there that were trained than before. I feel like I accomplished that. But in terms of the social change goals that need to happen there, it's long term, right? But one of the things I think is really important, because I've actually been rethinking the way that I set goals in terms of social change outcomes. I think number one, when we're creating our goals, we need to challenge ourselves. We need to constantly ask ourselves, like when we're creating our big, fat, long-term goal, is this at the scale, urgency, and intensity that it needs to be at? And whatever we land at, we should try to challenge ourselves to go a little bit higher in scale. So the amount of people we touch, in urgency, the speed the deliberate speed at which we go at, and the intensity, meaning the fundamental shift and change that we want. We need to go a little bit deeper, I think. I'll put it this way. After leaving Ferguson and seeing the sacrifice that those young people were willing to make in order to change that condition that they were dealing with, I decided that it was unacceptable to simply be in the fight and not believe in my core that we could see the change that we want in our lifetimes, right? Because I think that creates different, that'll create a different set of goal-setting metrics, right? The reason we don't do that is because it's really hard, and that's not a good enough reason not to want the change we want in our lifetime, right? And as educational advocates, and as parents, and as people who believe in young people, I think we owe it to them to be committed to that change in our lifetime. Otherwise, what we're saying is, all these kids that are going to school right now, yeah. That's essentially what we're saying, right? By being comfortable with simply change around the margins, right? So the reality is, change is really hard, right? And so sometimes change looks like change around the margins. But we can't be comfortable with it, is my point, right? We need to, and as a parent, I think it's easier to do this because this is about your child, right? You need to have that fire, that urgency in your belly that says, I'm gonna be crazy enough to believe that I, as an individual, and the people that I organize with can fundamentally change the condition that you're experiencing right now. So whatever you're experiencing in terms of unacceptable outcomes, I'm gonna go out today and fight my hardest to change that now. And the worst thing that can happen is that we fall short and then start again tomorrow to do that, right? So that urgency needs to be in your belly, where that's what you're actually doing. You need to be a crazy person for change, right? And I think, again, the professionalizing of the work that we do, kind of gets all the, separates the crazy out of it, right? We need the crazy, right? We need the visionary, right? We need people to take the bold action that isn't politically feasible, because that's how the politically unfeasible becomes real. That's how, so nobody would have believed that in early March, we would be having a conversation, I know I didn't think so, fundamentally about anti-Black racism and policing in this country. And from the president down to local authorities, including whichever police person you had here, would be talking about that. Nobody did, right? What happened? People did something crazy in St. Louis. And they believed that they didn't fall into political feasibility, right? And they weren't a prisoner of the parameters of political decorum, right? They went all in because they wanted their freedom today. And we need to go all in because we want not just a better education, but the same quality education that the kids in Jericho get. We demand today that the kids in Hempstead get that education, the kids in Wyandanch get that education. And we aren't comfortable with, well, it's just not politically feasible. Well, we just don't have the resources. Well, no. We're crazy enough to say, no, we're going to make it happen today. And that's how we were able to render, when we do that and when we're in the movement moment, we could render the invisible visible. So Black people got killed all the time, by the way, before this moment, but now it's news. So we rendered the invisible visible, right? All these people who just died anonymously, now they have names. And we make the impossible possible. That's our job, right? And it's very clear and binary, right? Which side are you on? Are you on the side of people who are dedicated to this change now? Or are you on the side of people who are actually comfortable with the status quo and comfortable with the whole generation of children basically being left by the wayside, right? You wake up every day, look yourself in the mirror, and decide which person you're going to be, and then act accordingly.
So that's a great answer. My follow-up question to the urgency, and I wish I had you around when my son was in elementary school, because I would have told his teachers, I'm supposed to be crazy. Maurice said I'm supposed to be crazy. And
listen, in this crazy world, if you're not crazy, there's something wrong with you.
Right. And I would, one of the things is I was able to advocate for him, and I think for the participants who are here, I'm just gonna speak as a parent. Don't allow for the educators, the principal, people you encounter in the school districts. And he went to the Central Islip School District for a very short period because I made a decision that he was labeled to allow for your child to not, he's not going to be that person. He's a behavior issue. You need to do this. My son is in his second semester of college and works at a doctor's office. because I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little crazy.
Yes.
They saw me coming and it was like, oh no.
That's right. It's
Okay, so you need to take advantage of that situation. We're gonna do the questions and answers at the end because we do have time, and we wanna make sure we get all the questions and so I just wanna say that, thank you for that.
And you're an interrupter. Yes. Thank you.
I totally am.
Just so we're aware of time, so we're gonna push back lunch a little bit.
So
It's
we can-
1:10 now, we'll
Okay.
eat at 1:30.
Okay,
A little
okay,
bit
and
more
then if
question
you-
and then Q&A.
You're phenomenal, first of all, because as you're speaking, my mind is like
Thank
going
you,
a
you're
mile a minute.
phenomenal.
Oh, good speaker.
Yeah.
Okay. So, speaking of urgency
Mhm.
and the belly in the fire, do you feel what you witnessed in Ferguson, Missouri, is this the new civil rights movement?
I believe so. I'm committed to making that true. I'm committed to the reason why I'm speaking here, and the reason why I haven't had a day off in 7 months is I believe that we're in a movement moment, and so while we're in it, it's my job to recruit as many people to be part of this movement, right? And if I and others do our job right, we'll create a long-term civil rights movement with real, meaningful outcomes for our people, right? It's gonna take a lot of work. It's not gonna happen overnight, but I feel committed to that. And I think it's not one of those things that you could, it's not like we're witnessing it. We create this. I mean, I think that's the thing, that's the exciting thing, right? About being alive and being human, right? It's actually, we create this reality, right? So when we want to shift, it's we that do it. And so if we reach enough people and we inspire enough people to be crazy with us, we'll reach a critical mass where that shift will happen.
All right, so then the next follow-up question would be, are you finding that more individuals are coming together now, and are they a diverse group of individuals coming together to stand up against the system and the cause?
Yes, so yes and yes.
Okay.
As an organizer, I've personally never been involved in such a growing movement, right? And what's beautiful about it is that it, like, I call it like it's like a multiracial Black Power movement, right? And it's super exciting. It's like, there's, you know, I was part of this huge march in New York, right? And it passed this, and this is also, you know, is, you know, I think you can never judge a book by its cover, right? Or well, sometimes you shouldn't, right? And so we passed like a gap or anthropology or something, and there are these two, you know, white women in like their 30s, and I thought, like, it looked like they came out of it, and I just assumed that they were bystanders, but they had signs and they were part of the march, right? And that, to me, was an indicator that our movement wasn't this small thing, and that we reached some level of resonance where people across difference were recognizing the fact that, made the connection that the liberation of Black folks is important to me and improves my life. And I want to live in a society where young Black kids aren't getting killed. I actually have a stake in that as a white person, right? That you don't have to, it's not a personal self-interest to not want Black children to get killed. You know, you don't necessarily have to be at risk or inner city or whatever, right? It could matter to you in a deep way because we have shared humanity, right? And as much as there's messages attempting to separate us and deny our shared humanity, we could persevere over that and connect to our shared humanity. So that was the exciting thing, actually seeing that happen. And that's what movements could do. Movements have the power to collapse difference and have people show true solidarity, right? And you know, back in the civil rights movement, you had white folks who lived in relative comfort, who stepped up, and some of them took the ultimate sacrifice and died, right? And so in movements, these are the moments where we actually are able to collapse those differences right? And show true solidarity. And so you have white folks who could have just stayed in their comfort and said, no, I'm gonna fight for the liberation of black people. And I'm gonna put myself at physical danger to fight for the liberation of black people. I could choose to stay home with my family. We're good, my children are good. I'm choosing not to do that. I'm choosing to possibly never come home to my family for the liberation of people that I don't even know in a state I've never been to, right? That's solidarity. And that's what we're actually gonna have to see, right, if we want any of these issues to change. And so I'm seeing it now, and it's very, very exciting.
Okay, thank you. So speaking of solidarity and diversity, issues of race can feel very polarizing to some. What do you feel is the role of the white ally or allies from other cultures, and how do people benefit from being part of the movement? How can we get more individuals that are not in this room to understand their importance?
Sure, so here's the thing, right, about this country and race. What I've noticed in my lived experience, it's like this thing that nobody wants to touch, but then once we're having the conversation, folks are actually really engaged and really excited about having it, right? So I think number one, coming from a place of authenticity and honesty, right? And speaking with honesty is super important. Number two, I mentioned relationships are really important, right? So if you're working across difference, if you're working across, like this is a multiracial space, right? It's also diverse in a lot of different ways. It's gender diverse and, you know, socioeconomically diverse. In order for this space to work together as a collective, you need to actually build relationships with one another on a human level, right? So, because like, if I just walk into the room and I see you, and you're just, black girl number 23 to me. And whatever prejudices I have around that, those are that's what I'm going to just place on you without knowing you, right? But when I know you as Judith, and I understand your motivations, and, your love for your family, and your story, then you're Judith, right? And, if I interact, with you, you're white guy with a suit number 15, and whatever, prejudices I have around that, I'm just gonna place on you, right? Now, imagine if without knowing who you are, right, and sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm an organizer. It's my job to agitate, right? Without knowing who you are, we're having a conversation about race and you say something that offends me. If I don't know you, it's gonna be a bad situation, right? Because I'm not interacting with you, the person, I'm interacting with white guy with a suit 15, right? And so if we build trust and relationship and a human connection, when you say that thing that offends me, I'm going to be committed to that relationship I have with you. So I could be like, dude, you offended me, we got a problem, let's talk about it, right? And so if we're going to have conversations around race, it has to first start with relationship. And it has to be authentic, right? And then the last thing that needs to happen is racism. See, race is not about diversity. There's a lot of diverse things. Race is about power, right? Racism is about power. Like racism is about power, right? So it's not just about a bunch of different people getting together and let's share each other's cultures and I'll bring in some Motown and we could listen to some klezmer. It's not about that, right? That's great and really nice and a good thing to do. Diversity is great, right? But if we aren't, so what I mean by power, we need to operate from the same, with the same facts, right? All that data that I talked about, that's not up for debate, right? So there's a conversation around race and racial justice that needs to happen. There actually shouldn't be a debate around the facts, around the fact that white supremacy actually really exists. Racism actually really exists, right? And then we could talk about how to confront it. We could talk about how to challenge it, right? But if we can't get to the place of accepting that it exists, then there's another step, but there's a prerequisite before we can have the interracial conversation, right? That's the step where anti-racist white folks talk to other anti-racist white folks and explain to the white folks that don't know racism exists that they exist, right? All right. Then all the people that exist racism could at least come to terms with the fact that racism exists, could have a dialogue, a very complicated, nuanced dialogue around what that means, right? But I would not suggest, for a number of reasons, that we have interracial conversations with folks who invisibilize my actual existence. It's not gonna go well.
Thank you. All right, so this is our final question that I came up with, and then we're gonna open up the floor for you to have some questions and pick Maurice's brain. So the final question is, when you were in Ferguson, what were some of the concerns that the youth voiced, for their future educational professional?
Oh, I'm sorry, there's one thing I wanna say about that. There's one thing I do wanna say about that. So, and then we'll go there, right?
Okay, that's fine.
So the only thing I wanna say about that, right, is we need to have these conversations. They're very intense for a lot of reasons. For people of color, it's super intense and traumatic, right, for a number of reasons. For white folks, it's traumatic for a whole different set of reasons, right? Right? Like, our trauma is a whole different magnitude, but your trauma is real, right? And the thing is, like, if you consider yourself, like, if you're a white person and you consider yourself somebody who wants to act in solidarity, like those folks back in the day, right, and are willing to take risk, you need to be able to take the risk, the risk of maybe saying something that somebody doesn't like, and the risk of maybe having a tense conversation. Because what I hear a lot is like, oh, I want to do something, but I just want to make sure I say the right thing, so I don't say anything at all. If you're not willing to take the risk of saying something wrong, right? And here, I mean, the human condition is about doing wrong things, right? So, actually, in every theater of activity, we make mistakes. And that's true for working on racism and working on social issues, right? So if your prerequisite for being part of the conversation is making sure that you can say everything right, you're never gonna have the conversation. You need to put some skin in the game, right? My skin in the game is the fact that I live every day with some level of fear around these institutions that operate around me. Driving here, every time I see the flashing lights, right? It's like PTSD, right? Right, that's my reality, right? That's my skin in the game. So your skin in the game could be having some uncomfortable conversations, okay? All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
So now, the second part is the youth. What concerns did they verbalize to you while you were down there that they had for their professional education?
This is what I heard from the youth, and this is why I think we need to have the urgency, right? It's actually our duty. It's our duty to do everything in our power to make sure that these young people have the best lives they could possibly have. And this is what I heard. Because we had young people, like you've seen some of the pictures. You have young people unarmed, shirtless, some of them, in front of tanks, phalanxes of police officers with tear gas and rubber bullets. And there were older folks trying to get them out of the street. Like, don't do this, don't protest, this is crazy, go home, it's past curfew. And the young people basically, the message that they gave was, we have absolutely nothing to lose. Your concern is that we're gonna get beat up here. We get beat up all the time by the police, actually. Like, that's actually our experience, right? That's what stop and frisk is, right? So stop and frisk, could just look like a police officer stopping you, right? And then questioning you, and maybe, what it often is, if you've actually ever experienced it, or if you know a young person experienced it, it's like, usually, the stop isn't pleasant, right? These young people, sometimes they're 13 years old, 12 years old, 11, they're getting cursed at by these adults with guns, right? Often, right? Sometimes they get roughed up, right? There was a video up in Harlem, right, that got circulated with this 13-year-old. Just getting beaten up on a regular stop. Just getting beaten up. and cursed at. It's a 13-year-old boy. And a grown police officer with a baton and a gun just beating him up, cursing him, you know? And like, this is what stop and frisk actually is, right? So we use these euphemisms, stop and frisk, but it's like, think about it. Think about who has a 13-year-old, knows a 13-year-old, or had a 13-year-old, right? Like imagine what that feels like for a 13-year-old child, right? Like, think about the trauma around that, right? So they feel like they have nothing to lose. And so, you know, people were like, well, you might go to jail. Like, we're already going to jail for like no reason. Like, you guys don't believe us. But it's like for no reason. We're like walking together in a group, and then the police stop us, and then they put us in jail, and then we're in the jail for 2 days. Like, so why, like, explain to us what the difference is between us at least taking a stand and going to jail, taking a stand, or just going to jail anyhow for just walking around, right? And so the one thing that I heard was the urgency, right? I just think the one message I would give you is the urgency. Don't accept the status quo, because what the status quo says is that there's a whole generation of children who just don't really matter. Maybe we'll get it right next generation. This one, nah. Maybe we'll get it right next generation. That's what the status quo says. Like, change is hard. You know, change is hard. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Yeah, your kid, I'm sure your kid is perfectly fine, but change is too hard. So we'll get it right next time. That's what the status quo is, right? And so what I heard from them is, don't accept that. Fight for us. Go hard. Take risk. Have that urgency. That's what I heard from them.
Thank you, that was a great answer. So we're gonna open up the floor to any questions that you might have, and I see a hand here, so.
Question was, and you answered it, one of them in the first part was about the other races that were marching in Ferguson.
Yes.
You did touch on that about the white people, because I know that I saw a lot of white people out there also marching, and I felt very good about that. My other question was your experience in the church.
Okay.
Because I was following you, and when you say you were in that church and what was happening,
Mm-hmm.
I was very concerned about that. So would you like to share it? And my other thing is, how did you get into Ferguson? Where did you live? How did you walk into a place maybe you never been before? Or
Yeah.
how did you do that?
Okay, I'll answer really quickly. So what she's talking about is like there was a church that was a safe house, right? That folks used, and the police began to be really aggressive and raided it once. It's hard to describe. You know, one day there'll be books written. They probably won't be all accurate, but it's really hard to describe what happened there. But basically, all the apparatus of the Missouri state government were trained against the population of Ferguson. And during that time period, during those first weeks, state police, the National Guard, the local police were trained against and looked at every black person as suspicious in that community. So it was like something I never experienced in my entire life. They were using like real military grade weaponry and equipment on regular people in their suburban neighborhood. It was like witnessing and being part of some crazy movie, right? And so it was just super intense, very stressful. You had people getting shot by rubber bullets, getting burned from the canisters of tear gas. You had young people as young as 10, getting hit with tear gas. You had whole communities and whole apartment complexes because there's these like tanks, and they're shooting the tear gas canisters indiscriminately through. Imagine like right out there, it's a big tank, and they're just shooting tear gas like left and right. So all of the houses, this building here, everybody in here, we're gonna be like coughing and crying and wiping the tear gas out of our eyes. So random people who weren't protesters, the media, everybody basically had to experience that, right? It was the scariest thing I ever experienced in my entire life. So how did I walk into that environment? So one of the things that I've learned as an organizer is, sometimes you have to fake it until you make it. So, and I think it's important, as leaders, right, in moments of crisis and chaos, to exude confidence even though there's no reason to have any. And so I walked in with full confidence, right, and full calm, because there were young people that needed to feel safe, even though I was scared out of my mind, right? And I provided whatever skills I thought would be helpful in the situation, and I asked questions, and I think I showed humility and respect for the people on the ground, and the fact that it was their community, and I was there to show solidarity, and I think enough folks felt like I was genuine. So.
Thank you, Mom.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question here, and then we'll go.
As you were talking, I'm going to date myself here.
Yeah.
I was teaching in Miami on the corner of what we called Riot Central in 1982 during the McDuffie riots. And a black man was shot, a professional black man, on a motorcycle just because he was somewhere that somebody thought he shouldn't be. And there was a huge outcry and uprising and burning. And I fought very hard back then because I really believed in the cause. And I had 5-year-olds in my care and was close to the families. And how do we make it stick? Because I've now watched this cycle. I'm old enough, who likes to admit that? But I've watched
You're
this
killing the
cycle,
game. You're doing all right.
and I've fought with this cycle, and I have gone grassroots and befriended families. Mine was the only car never keyed because I hung out in the projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I built personal relationships. We had to park our cars on the street. I didn't have air conditioning in my car. I literally left my car open with a big thing of candy on the seat that says, "You don't have to steal, take whatever you want."
Mm-hmm.
And the bowl would empty, and my car was never keyed. And I loved those people. They became very much my family while I was teaching. And now I see it again, and I so want to do something. But how do you? I'm a white person,
Mm-hmm.
I go out there, and I'm white person number 32, and you go out, and you gain trust. I'm working with Urdu population right now. I teach in Connecticut and live here. I've got a split life, and I'm seeing the same thing with that population. So how do we change it at a cellular level so that we really create change? Because it just cycles.
Yeah, I feel like that's an open question, but I think one of the things that what we're attempting to do in this movement is recognize the enormity of the change, right? So I think one of the things that we recognize and what we're trying to learn from the past movement, right, is that it's not just about legal change, right? We need cultural change as well, right? And so we need to have a mass movement that captures enough people where we could have the deep culture change. And we need to have a fundamental change and urgency that I feel like sometimes abated before. And we need to prepare people for the long haul, right? So it isn't like a spasm, because it's very easy to get burnt out. It's very easy to be in it for a little while, and then, so we need to provide an opportunity to make this movement sustainable so people could see it as a lifestyle. Like, I'm gonna be crazy now, And so we're very much trying to figure out ways to make that happen, and also provide multiple points of engagement. So everybody is just not gonna be out in the streets confronting tanks, right? And doing a street protest in front of tanks. And we need to make that okay and provide other meaningful points of engagement for people to be able to be part of this movement. Because we all have a place, I feel. We all have a place. Thanks.
Thank you. So I got some help from the audience with the hands. Thank you, guys. So we had a question over here.
Hi, Maurice. My name is Mary Stewart, and I just want to acknowledge and appreciate what you're doing. And my question is, how do you balance how do you balance or put balance as in your personal life and as an activist? That's one. And the other number two is, how do you measure your success with all this?
Great. Those are great questions. Wow.
That's a PLI graduate.
Wow. That's a really great question. Yeah. Those are great questions. So, I mean, I think that, so I think in certain crisis moments, right, like there was a crisis moment in Ferguson. I'm going to be 100% transparent with you. There was no balance, right?
Oh.
Like in that particular moment, we were literally working sometimes 20-hour days with no days off because there's so much to do and so many people to reach, and the enormity of the situation was so big. Obviously, that's not sustainable, and that's not advisable. But in certain moments, sometimes you got to go in. Sometimes, that's how I feel, right? But I think in order to be in it for a lifetime, be in it for decades, you need to go at a sustainable level, right? The reality is there's always going to be more work, right? And so you need to, I would say this. I would say that you actually, just to get all Oprah-ish, right? Right? You actually, in order to be engaged in social change, you need to start with identifying and self-love practices that you honor no matter what, right? You honor those things no matter what. And I think that's true actually outside of this movement, but I think it's important, and as a parent, I'm not a parent, but I know parents, and I know as parents struggle with this whole concept of self-love because they're like, well, am I being selfish, right? The reality is, that airplane sort of, you gotta fix that thing on before you fix it onto your children, right? Listen, like if you're not alive, nobody's gonna put the mask on your kid, right? You gotta make sure you're alive first so you can take care of your kid. And we have to make sure, it's actually this is our job, right? Making sure that we're healthy and sane and grounded, right? And having those self-love practices that do that and never deviate. Oh, well, we have a meeting Sunday. Well, I gotta go to church if that's what your self-love practice is. I gotta go to church at 10. That's what you do. That's just what I do. That's not movement time. It just is what it is. Or I gotta be with my family and eat dinner with that's just what it is. Whatever it is for you. For me, I do martial arts. I do capoeira. I do it 3 times a week, and I didn't do it in St. Louis, but it's something that I do no matter what, and I have a very busy schedule, right? But you find those things, and I think that grounds you, and so you don't forget who you are. And then to answer your second question, how do you measure success? So the way that I'm measuring it right now, what I'm trying to do is build a network nationally of these organic groups that have popped up during this Black Lives Matter movement. And so I'm gonna measure success based on the number, how many localities around the country can we create these groups and these action councils in, right? And so the Black Lives Matter has 26 different cities, and then there's other networks. And so connecting all those networks together, so this could be a sustained movement, and it's not just a bunch of people out in the streets that happened like a few months ago, but it's actually this movement that continues to grow. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're gonna take.
It's because I am the struggle. And my big thing is, I've always been compelled because I see the struggle for the Black male. It's a fight. It's not just a fight for the Black male, it's a fight for the female. But I think the female have a more edge of going where they have a wall that they're always fighting. And for him to sit there and be so transparent and real, that we need to understand it. And I'm crying because I know the movement is powerful, what you're talking about. It's long been waiting, because I always say, since Martin Luther King stopped, the fight has stopped. And people think everything is real now, and it's not. It's all superficial. It's not realistic. The world's not realistic, and I'm a constant battle for my children. I fight constantly, all the time, to push them ahead, and you have to be the parent has to be available, and not all parents, especially minorities, are available to be there. And to sit here and listen, today I wasn't even gonna be able to attend, but this was the best day that ever happened to me today. Because I think we need a forum to have more people, more children, black and white, hear you. I've never heard of you, but today when I'm just listening to you, I said, he needs to be heard by people that are coming so they can see the relevancy of where we need to move. I just started working in Jamaica, which is a stark difference from working in Huntington, if you're aware of Jamaica, Queens. And I had experience a black young kid being frisked, and I wasn't the person being frisked, but I was very, very upset about it. And I had a dialogue with my sister about it, and I said, I didn't even see why there was 9 police officers, and he was sitting there. They talked to him, they took his ID, and they were searching and searching. And I said, realistically, would a white child have been walked up to and they asked him for his ID and search for something bad, or search, most likely they're gonna find it. I mean, he's in Jamaica, he's probably, I mean, you're from Long Island, you had that experience and all that stuff. But the likelihood of them finding something on his record is probably 90%. And they found it, they arrested him, and his pants was falling off, and they're gonna pull it. I said, what if his pants fall down and his body's exposed? That's so embarrassing and humiliating. And I said, how? I wanted to get up and say something, but I said, but then I probably arrested myself. And my sister goes, well, he probably did something. And I said, how do you know that? Maybe he didn't, but they found something. I said, they might not even found anything, but they decided to take him on some kind of suspicion or something. But they're frisking under his hair, and it was just insulting in general. And I said, that's a demeaning thing. And I'm sure they arrested other people, but I don't ever see them do what they did. And I think it was just, everyone was laughing. And the whole time I was watching, I said, that's insulting to him. I don't care what he did, it's insulting, and it's degrading, and how does he step away from that and become a man? And my big thing with my son, my fight with him is that I want you to be a strong man, not just a black man, because that's a whole other story, but you need to be a strong man to be able to deal with the stuff that's gonna come along. And so I really celebrate this moment.
Thank you.
I'm so
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it's real, yo. It's real out here, you know. And I mean, and here's the thing. Here's the thing, white folks. I want to keep you to. Underneath all of us people of color, if we've lived here long enough, if you just dig down 1 centimeter, there's a well of rage and sadness, right, that's just ready to burst out based on our lived experience. And that's what she's expressing, right? And I just thank her for sharing that with all of us. I just really thank her. Because this in many ways is life and death. In many ways is life and death for a lot of us. And it's not an academic conversation, right? Like for most black folks, like we have people that we're related to who are locked up or who have been locked up, right? That's our reality. Or maybe we've been locked up, right? And that indignity, it doesn't go away. It could stain you for a lifetime. And what we ultimately want, when we say liberation or we say freedom, or what we want, what everybody wants, which is everything that goes with being a full citizen and a full human being, right? So when you interact with other people, when you interact with the state, when you interact with police, you're interacting with those people, the state, and the police, and everybody else as a full human being. That's all we want. It's a very simple premise that we've been fighting for since we came here. And the reason why we fight because we have to, right? Because there's a basic human desire for dignity, right? That demands that we fight. And so one thing that we do is, to get through it, we swallow that pain. And we smile it away, right? We repress it. But, you know, one message I have for you, black folks, other people of color, that well of anger, that well of righteous anger, of pain, that's one of our assets. We can't swallow it anymore. We can't repress it anymore. We can't step on it anymore, right? Why are we swallowing it? What, to make other folks feel comfortable? Right? Why are we repressing it? Just to get through that day? Right? The most liberating thing we could do is express that rage, express that righteous anger, tell our truth, tell our stories, and channel it in a way where we collectively can organize and change our society. So I invite you to be real with that rage. And free yourself from having to suppress your reality and your story. I mean, one of the things, this is the last thing I'll say, because I know people gotta eat. It's the last thing that I'll say, right? As human beings, it's so vital that we tell our story authentically, right? Now the thing is, specifically, I know the black experience. And so one of the ways that we were able to stay safe as black people is by making sure that the white people around us felt safe, right? Like during slavery, right? That's how we stay safe, right? I'm not a threat. I'm not a threat. I'm not a threat. And black parents instruct their children, right, on how not to be a threat to the larger society, on what to say, on how to look, on what to dress, right? That is actually a very dehumanizing process, right? But we do it because we want to protect our children, right? And so what you do is create a whole class of people who are more invested in the safety of others than themselves. And that has to stop today. And when that stops, that'll get us one closer to our freedom. We can't be more invested in the safety of others and the comfortability of others than ourselves. It comes up in every way. If you're black and you work in a multiracial environment and you're interacting with folks, right? You have to deny who you are and assume the culture of the dominant culture. You have to change the way you talk, change the way you walk so you're not seen as a threat, because you don't want to be the threatening black woman or the threatening black man, right? In every interaction with everybody in the dominant culture, you're denying yourself, denying who you are, right? We can't speak black English because black English is deemed as unsophisticated and uneducated, but standard English, which is just the English that white people use, that's sophisticated, right? We can't act in the ways that we naturally feel like we want to act, because if you talk loud, you're being aggressive, right? We have different cultures. We have different tolerance for all types of things, right? So we got to start challenging ourselves to keep it real with who we are everywhere, right? And that's true in how we interact interpersonally, and also how we create political space, right? So I just want to, again, I really appreciate your honesty and your courage and you sharing your story and not sanitizing it and not minimizing it to make it safe for mixed company, right? We can't do that anymore.
So we have one final question. Do you want to?
Well, a lot of it has been answered, but
Okay.
I heard someone say back in the day, I'm way back in the day.
Black don't crack, I can't tell.
And when I'm just amazed at, and I have a question, I'll get to it right away. Having had a lot of experiences, and most of us have had, having been founded and grounded in the church or in various houses of worship from people in the community in which I grew up, I am curious to know how you manage to have change happen via the representatives in the houses of worship in Ferguson. Because it was a sort of a grounded thing in the community from which I came from. You make no waves. And we've been told you get your rewards in heaven. Now, I'm not knocking the churches, but we were being told that to protect us. How did you get through that?
So, I mean, to be fully honest with you, and thank you, and to be fully honest with you, there was a divide, a political divide. There were some of the traditional folks who were maybe a little bit older, right, and some of them came from the church, who had a different theory of change, right? And I think their theory of change was like quiet strength, sort of, don't make waves. Like, let's sit down and figure it out. Let's simmer down the tension. And then there was a different theory change of like, well, no, let's turn up the tension, actually, right? And so I was working with the turn up the tension crew, okay? And I think I think there's still a divide, a political divide around that. I think, unfortunately, this is not true for every church, and this is not true for every civil rights organization, but there's a political divide, and I think we're going to have to come to terms with it, that there's some folks that are more interested in peace than justice, right? And are more committed to peace than justice. When peace without justice actually isn't peace. It's just peace for the privileged and powerful, right? Peace without justice actually is not peace. It's just only peace of mind for the privileged and powerful. And it is violence for those without privilege and power, right? And so what that is saying, there's some folks in the black community that are more committed to that. And they're like, well, we can't free us all. We're all not going to get free, but maybe some of us could become privileged and powerful, so maybe we can get some peace, right? And I think there's a real political difference. And there's people who are more committed to justice because they want true lasting peace. And I think that's something that that's a conversation that's gonna have to evolve. But yeah, there were some tensions around that. And some of that crew, I think, is still trying to figure out what they're trying to do. But I'm gonna hang out with the folks who are turning up.
I'm going to take executive privilege now, okay? Just to say that I am old enough to have been in the movement in the 60s and in teaching, having very much similar experiences in pre-kindergarten, and opened the first pre-kindergarten in the state in Southampton in 1966, a year before Head Start. So, and worked with Head Start. And there was a man who was part of our movement, and you may remember Clarence Jones.
Yes,
And he used to come here and did workshops on just what happens to little boys, black little boys, when they first, he used to talk about at the bus stop, in kindergarten and first grade, they would walk with their arms around each other, nobody, separated out by color. And by third grade, there was a separation that so damaged these children. And what I saw in teaching and in my experience of being part of the movement, very much a part of the movement, all I can say is at this point, I'm thrilled that, you know, being 81 years old now, and
You killing the game, Janet. Janet is killing the game.
So the fact that the stamina isn't there as it used to be, that there is a movement here, there is a place here that can and is segregated as we live in housing and schools and whatever. You know, Long Island was built to be able to do that. The way we segregated absolutely right from the beginning. So it gives me great hope that there is, an ability that we all can, speak out and have our voices heard and be sure that it is for justice. And I recognize that peace and justice dichotomy that exists.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
So I just wanted to say thank you to Danielle and Janet and Maurice for giving me the opportunity to have this dialogue as a parent and a PLI alumni. So I'm going to give the mic back to Danielle.
All right. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Judith and Maurice.